I'll call the meeting to order at 6:32. Looking at the consent agenda, any discussion or questions or concerns about previous minutes, and it's quite a lot of policies. Otherwise, if there's no discussion, concerns, someone can make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
I'll move.
Great, thanks, Polly. By roll, Rick,
Aye.
Polly,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye. Okay, moving forward, Morgan, still no visitors,
Still no visitors.
and any needs from admin folks to switch around the agenda and as it's laid out?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on. Heather, you're up with the central office spotlight on the Vermont Youth Project.
Great, thank you. I am going to share my screen. I've got a slideshow for everybody. Oh,
I bet you'd like permission then, wouldn't you?
I would love permission, please, to share my screen.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Okay, great. Can everybody see it? Excellent.
Yes.
So perfect. So a year ago, I gave a presentation on the Vermont Youth Project data that we received from October 2019, and back again, and we have October 2020 data. So just a quick summary for some people they might not that are here might not have be super familiar with the Vermont Youth Project. It is a 5-year positive youth development initiative based off the Iceland model. They have 20+ years of positive data for work like this to lower substance use and increase positive factors within communities. So the Vermont Youth Project is like the Vermont's version of that. And it's bringing together initiatives that are already working well in Vermont, and Vermont youth voice and youth engagement. And through the surveys, we're looking at the risk and protective factors that youth are reporting seeing in their communities. What's really important is the survey results are based on youth data and youth perceptions. And it's kind of shapes some of how we do some of our work with how are they perceiving their environments. So the protective factors, the survey itself breaks it down into 5 categories. There's the community, family, school, third space, and individual and peer groups. So when the students are answering the questions, there's questions from these different categories, and then they're asked in multiple different ways. The folks that do the survey data analysis, like they have a lot of safety nets, just like with the YRBS, for being able to determine more the authentic answers and stuff. Our supervisory union, so Enosburg and Richford, are the 2 communities that we're surveying, well, at the schools, grades 7 through 12. So it's youth at the high school level from all 6 communities. We had the highest turnout this year for student participation. That was really just like super good. We have really amazing, solid numbers. It's like 80% or higher, depending on which school. So that was really good. We have some celebrations this year. Some of the numbers we're noticing, and I just need to make an adjustment so I can see my screen better. So some substance uses were declined in the past year. We're seeing some lowered numbers, as much as 0% use in some categories. And then alcohol use with middle school youth was lower as well. and we're seeing just some notable trends down. Something that stood out was we had a separate survey this year specifically to target how COVID has been affecting students. And it has been affecting students, absolutely. But it didn't have quite the negative impact that we were expecting to see. In some cases, it was about 25% of youth were saying that there was a negative impact, which is still substantial. You know, this is a pandemic, and we understand that, but like the team thought the numbers would be higher. So that kind of tells us that as communities, you know, we're developing that resilience and the positive supports for the students. Another celebration is the perception that many or all of their peers are engaging in risk factors is going down, because we know that peer pressure and perception of how cool it is can play a role in the whether or not a youth is willing to take the risk and try some substances. This is a pretty big data sheet, but the red is signifying increases where we expected to see decreases. Noted is really in the column with chewing tobacco. The green, those are really large decreases in numbers, but you'll see even within the blue, there are decreases. And what's really great is, you know, it's 1 year. So 0.5 percentage point or a whole percentage decreasing, that's positive. That's good to see. That is also a celebration. It's been 12 months. So 1 percentage point down a year, but over 5 years and 10 years, that can also be substantial. But in some cases, we're seeing 5%, 6%, 15%, some pretty big decreases. And I can share these slides with the board as well, because it's a lot of numbers to digest. So again, red is increases where we thought we'd see decreases, and green are large decreases. So we're seeing some numbers with alcohol use still being a little high, but we're also seeing some really wonderful decreases in the data. And I pulled these data points out specifically because they're like the standard comparisons for substance use. Again, there was, I think it's 67 pages of data for each community from the standard survey. And then the COVID survey that we did as well was an additional 17 pages. So there's quite a lot of different data points. Some of the trends we noticed. Just like in previous years, there's a strong correlation between youth using substances and their being out of doors late at night, and perception of whether or not their parents are going to care if they use. And there's also the positive correlation between youth spending time with families and participating in co-curricular activities and lower substance use as well. Perception of peer support and adult support is a little low this year. We're seeing one of our interpretations is, you know, everybody's pretty stressed out. The alternative, like when we look at a lot of the social emotional questions, though, students are getting their needs met. So there was a little bit of, just seemed a little odd to see these numbers, and some seem to be low in some sections and a little higher in other sections. It seemed to be a contradiction. So our coalition is really curious to look into that a little bit more. Use of chew remains notably high in this region. So this isn't just from, we're seeing that in the data for the Vermont Youth Project, but also our coalition partners who work on tobacco prevention know that this, like the Franklin County region, just happens to be fairly high with use of chew for some reason. But again, to repeat from another slide, the perception that their friends are using substances is declining. So that's good. Actionable data points. As I was just talking about, we really do need to, as the coalition, we're going to be looking into like why CHU might be on the rise. Oftentimes, it could be related to access, and it could be related to perception of, maybe it seems to be a safer substance or something. So we do need to do a little bit of research on that. And alcohol and cannabis use remain popularly used substances. We can talk about this again. It's they're perceived as less dangerous substances to use, especially with the decriminalization and then like the legislation that's coming in. Campaign against e-cigarettes seems to be working. Those numbers are going down, so we need to hold on to that momentum. There's just been a lot of work within the schools, often student-led around this e-cigarette initiatives. And then there's been statewide initiatives as well to make the access harder for students. It's much, much more difficult for them to access e-cigarettes. We need to support what looks like positive trends for these lower substance use in middle school students. 8th and 9th grade seems to be the age where they're particularly vulnerable for using the substances. So we're seeing like a lower trend in our 7th and 8th graders, but our 9th grade numbers, 9th and 10th grade numbers might be going up a little bit. So it tells us that students are transitioning into high school and having potentially greater responsibilities at home and just maybe more freedoms. That's just something we need to look into, especially in terms of what can we offer them in out of school time for programming. My experiences is that 8th graders tend to do after school programs, but maybe not as many as the 9th graders. So in terms of like leaps, we're definitely going to be looking into those numbers and how we might be able to support those students a little bit more. Next steps. We had a phenomenal workshop last Tuesday with the coalition, and we have a couple of action steps for our 6-month plan with the project. We're going to expand our leadership or the coalition of people that meet monthly. We have parents on the coalition, but we are all representing a different organization and parents as well. So we're looking for people whose primary role is to be there as a parent of individuals in the community. And we're looking to also expand, recruit another Richford school-based member. Beth participates a lot and it's great. We'd like to see somebody else also within the school to help support so that Beth can continue to be there every month if she wants to. She's a phenomenal support, but it's also kind of balanced in the school as well. Community outreach and sharing. So as we did last year, we're going to have targeted presentations to different stakeholders and offer workshops. Some of the workshops are presented by Vermont After School, and those are the ones that I shared with the board last month, and the live links were shared with you with the meeting agenda. We also have a Facebook page, so those meetings the workshops are there as well. And we're going to work on creating weekly snippets of our data with our community partners so that they can share them in their own newsletters, just to keep building on the networks that we already have. We have amazing supports within our communities. And this is really a joint effort. So the more that we can really show that we're aligning all of our work together, the stronger the project is. The community and family engagement, again, that goes back to the workshops. We're going to work as the coalition together to do an inventory of what's currently offered for out of school time or third space time, and then start surveying communities to see what more would they like to see offered, and specifically do it by age group, to see if there's an area of focus that we really need to focus on for out of school activities. And then the parent and co-collaboration, kind of similar to what we were talking about before, increase the conversation within the parent groups, continue to invite parents to the workshops. I'm hoping that, we've had, was it 10 months of getting used to a virtual world, that it might feel a little more accessible to families to participate in some virtual workshops. And also continue to find ways for us to be creative on how that we can also reach those individuals who, between time and internet and whatever other reason, can't access the workshops. And then also educational support for families, which will also be based on input, but some ideas of like family cooking classes, or helping, like, you might be familiar, the Notch did this a couple of years ago. It was the Learning Kitchen program through Hunger Free Vermont. So something to that style of, we're going to teach you about some really awesome new meals that might be really helpful for family with a budget, or family with dietary restrictions, or just getting your children to eat vegetables or something. And also you can cook it at home, and here's the ingredients for the food. So the same idea. So part of our work too will be looking for some funding for some of these kind of programs. And then lastly, with our next steps is like the youth voice, or the youth council that I've spoken to you about a few times. They've been meeting. They have a draft for a call for proposals. They have $5,000 to be able to fund a couple of different youth-led proposals. So these are the youth council will be putting a call out to all their peers to fill out these surveys, and then review the proposals, and there will be a vote. And then by about hopefully by May, these projects will be implemented. And then of course we're going to be looking for other creative ways for youth input throughout this entire process. And that is the presentation. And I'm going to stop sharing. So it's been a pretty exciting journey for the past year. It's been a lot of learning on how to maintain engagement when we've been so isolated from one another. We've built momentum with our coalition despite the separation. And we've got between the schools and the community and regional partners, we have a huge partnership, and that part's phenomenal. The conversation is really solidifying together, which is really good. This is what we're looking for, because we have a joint mission, and that is to build flourishing communities. We have great communities, and we're taking them to the next steps. I had a really amazing conversation with the Richford Co-Economic Development Coordinator last weekend. And so there's some really cool developments that are happening there. I'm hopeful that there'll be also next stages with the community center with Enosburg coming in this spring. Does anybody have any questions?
Not so much a question, but just a kind of comment on just how amazing and important I think the work is that you're doing. And I really appreciate it. It's so vitally important now more than ever. And some of the numbers are always a little alarming, but it seems as though the program takes such a great kind of holistic approach to looking at how we can kind of address the issues, and hopefully orient toward prevention in the first place. And it's really impressive. Thanks so much, Heather. I do have one question. Do you foresee a time when we might start to kind of also be able to target our 7th and 8th graders in the K through 8 schools, so that, or even younger, that's kind of age appropriate when you're talking about prevention, so that we are kind of creating a kind of common language across all our schools of how we want to kind of look at these issues and these challenges around, especially around substance use, and hopefully keep kids from even beginning any kind of use from a young age. And we're seeing 7th and 8th graders already dabbling in with alcohol, marijuana, the vaping especially, and as you said, the chew. So I'm just curious if and when that'll kind of start to come into our other schools, so that we have a really kind of cohesive approach across all the districts.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And something I didn't mention with my presentation is Nick DeVita is part of our coalition. So I have a meeting with him on Friday. We're going to go over the data in general, but the SEL data and the COVID data. And so some of that will be used to inform his work, which is SU wide. And some of the next steps is definitely to go and bring some more of the work into the other communities, which is like any community member is invited to these workshops. So you don't have to be from Enosburg or Richford. And you don't necessarily have to have a student at either one of the high schools as well. We definitely are thinking SU wide with our work. And also a lot of our partners are Franklin County substance prevention partners. So they have a really great lens of not only seeing what's happening in Enosburg and what's happening in Richford, but they're seeing MVU's data as well. So they get to see a broader spectrum of trends with the 7th through 12th grades. And we're also doing a presentation with NRPC, Northeast Regional Planning Commissions next Wednesday. And again, those are regional partners as well to help with prevention and grant writing. So it definitely is on our radar to directly bring some stuff into the other schools. And that 7th and 8th grade is definitely a target for preventing the onset, which is one of the reasons we advocated to start the survey with such a young age, because in Iceland, they only survey their 10th graders. And we really wanted we had anecdotal evidence for onset being around 13 or so. But we really wanted to have the concrete evidence about where that start is, and then to be able to see around what age level we're going to be breaking down these trends. So definitely middle school is sometimes a challenge for after school. Just thinking in my realm, and it's a conversation that I have with coordinators pretty regularly of okay, how do we increase these numbers with our middle school students? Because keeping them connected, keeping them involved is building up their protective factors. And then more activities outside of school and the LEAPS program for middle and high school, middle and the early 9th and 10th grade students as well.
And just to piggyback on that, Heather, I think that, one thing I noticed in Montgomery is the summer time with the teens. That's a time where we've struggled in our community, at least. I'm sure it's not unique, with kind of the lack of kind of cohesiveness and no real community center. And, they're too old for camp, but they're too young for employment. And it's this kind of in between phase. Not that it's not an issue during the school year, but it's been an issue in our town for sure in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And that's we've tried to do a teen center, but there wasn't enough kind of both funding and momentum behind it. But it seems as though I wonder if there'd be a way to kind of bridge also the school year with stuff in the summer that kind of, because that's a really vulnerable time when there's a lot of like almost too much spaciousness and not enough to do to then, you know, make good choices and have like more wholesome kind of ways to kind of be connected and have fun and engaged, but stay away from substance use.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just the, you said it already, you know, transitional age group. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited to be joining the governor's task force for universal after school access, because it's just like there are those gaps, because you know, Montgomery is a small rural community, as our, you know, our communities around here. So it's just youth centers do struggle, and then there's not generally the funding to support those kind of programs, and the specific types of space for those programs. But part of the work too is increasing the community language and support around youth, especially within that age group, that makes it, that involves them in different ways. That it's, so yes, it'd be great for them to have a youth center as well, but also where else can they be welcomed and engaged during that time? Is it more volunteer opportunities for them? Is it a work study kind of situation that we can set up within different communities? So there's many different ways for us to approach that, and I'm assuming we're going to have to use multiple different approaches as well in every community.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Heather. You did a great job. So I went through the data, as you know, a couple of days ago, and it's so dense. There's a lot of it, and you were able to put it together in a really cohesive way to be able to look at both the positive and the negative trends that we saw in that data. So thank you for that. And I also just want to acknowledge and thank you for this is challenging work in normal times, trying to engage people in these conversations and engage families. And although it would be tempting during a pandemic when you can't physically be present to take a pause, but doing that, Heather, I think has really accelerated and used this as an opportunity to lean in even more with partnerships. And I think that's really serving the organization, not just in the Vermont Youth Project work, but in other work as well. So thank you. Keep doing the good work.
Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Heather. So if no one has anything else for Heather, we'll move on to central office updates. I'll go kind of, I know everyone included their updates in the board packet, but we'll just go down the list in case anyone has questions for a particular person or anything to add. So Dominic, you're up. I don't know if you have anything to add or anyone has questions for Dominic.
I can give a little bit of an update on the T-Mobile side of things. Jody and I had an interview with them, and we have been approved to take part in their program. And they approved us for as many as 160 hotspots, which could actually be free internet for students, and any student that's eligible for free or reduced launch is eligible. It's 100 gig of data for a year for the free plan. So it probably wouldn't get someone through a full year, but there's also heavily discounted options that we could get for, I think it was $12 a month for 100 gig per month plan, or $15 a month for an unlimited data plan. So our next step is,
clarify how that would work? These would be hotspots in people's homes?
yes, yeah, it's called Project 10 Million. It's something T-Mobile is trying to do, with their goal being to help 10 million students with internet. So yeah, of course the catch is where we live, and our cell phone signal up here. That it's only going to work where T-Mobile has strong enough cell phones coverage. So that's our next step, is pulling together the addresses of students who could use some help, and then we send those to T-Mobile, and they'll give us feedback as far as which ones do they think will have strong enough coverage that it'll actually be a useful internet connection.
Another piece that I thought was interesting is that the hotspot actually pairs with the student's school issued device. So it's not a wide open hotspot that anyone in the household can access. It's a hotspot specifically for the student's device and their schoolwork.
Excellent.
That's great. I had one question, Dom. Zoom, as we're looking towards, informational meetings and town meetings and all that, what is our Zoom capability as far as numbers?
With the accounts we have now, we can do up to 300 users.
Okay.
But we could, and we have expanded it before, like on the FNESU Zoom account like we use for these meetings. We bought just a 1 month license before to expand that up to 500. So we can do that as needed as we move forward.
Okay, I think 300 is probably okay. But yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Dom. That's amazing. That's really so cool that T-Mobile is doing that. I hope that we end up being able to really use it up here, even with our limited cell coverage in some of the area.
Dominic, that was
Yeah.
a 5-year-long initiative, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So thank you. I forgot to add that part.
Awesome. All right. So then moving on, Jody, you're next.
I didn't have anything to add.
Nothing to add. Okay. Any questions for Jody from the board? Okay. All right. So then Michelle, do you have anything that you'd like to add, or are there any questions for Michelle?
I have one thing to add. So today, the high school principals and myself and a couple of our special educators met with John Spinney, who is from the Agency of Education, and we talked about something that's called Pbgr access plans, which stands for Proficiency-Based Graduation Requirement Access Plan. A lot of words there, but it replaces what we used to call the multi-year plan for students who needed alternative courses. So for example, if a student couldn't access Algebra 1, we created like a life skills math course. So when the shift to proficiency-based requirements occurred, the agency then created these access plans for students on IEPs. So it's really designed for the 1% of our population in special education, and it's going to allow us some flexibility for our students in what we're calling our TAPS program at Richford High School, which is the transitioning into adult programs and services. So we can look at the graduation requirements and determine which ones that students can meet traditionally, and then which ones that we need to tease out and offer just the essential elements of that particular graduation requirement. So our next step, which this happened today, is I haven't even had a chance to talk to Lynn and Jody about it, but our next step is to the high school principals and probably Jody and Lynn and I to sit down and figure out like what's our procedure going to be around this. But exciting things for our students who can't necessarily access some of the curriculum in the graduation requirements the traditional way. So moving forward in the right direction.
Nice. That's great. Thanks, Michelle. So next is Jamie, if you have anything to add, or if there are any questions for Jamie.
No, I have nothing else to add to my report.
Any questions from the board? No? Okay. Moving on, Dawn, you're up. If you have anything else to add or any questions for Dawn.
I don't have a lot to add, just wanted to let you know that I am working with the Farm to Families food box distribution. I did get an email from the state. They were looking for some schools to help sponsor some more distribution centers. So I have talked with the state and with Vermont Food Bank and have signed us up to host them. I'm not sure where or when that will happen. It's looking like probably sometime in February. And I told them that any of our schools would be a possibility to host one of them, that we've done 3 of them at Enosburg, and they seem to be really well utilized.
Great. That's wonderful, Dawn. I also just wanted to kind of applaud you for that review from the state about the role you've played in kind of streamlining and unifying the food program across all the schools. That's really, really impressive. And I just wanted to reflect how wonderful that was to read. So thank you so much. Any questions for Dawn? Nope. Okay. Great. So next, Robin, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add or questions for Robin? Nothing new to add, Robin, to what was in your report?
Nothing to add. Nope.
You're all good. Okay, cool. All right. And then lastly, but not least, Gabby with the Virtual Academy. Anything to add to your report, Gabby, or any questions for Gabby?
I will add just one thing. So the VTBLC semester started on Monday, and as we started with the K-8 students, or sort of having an orientation when they come in, I also started that with any new students who were starting virtual learning through VTBLC in the 9 through 12 grade level. So I have some students doing orientations with me. I'm hoping to increase their ability to access that curriculum and be successful. So that's the only thing I would add. That's going pretty well. I've got some students and I think they're going to do better.
Nice. Great. Thanks so much, Gabby.
And look at Gabby's awesome background, like her palm trees even like glowing in the breeze. I, for a split second was like, wait, where is Gabby?
I wish.
We all do.
That's pretty dreamy, Gabby. I like that backdrop.
Yeah. In this February break for a while.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. So moving on, Morgan, you're up with the financial and business report.
So in terms of my report, there's nothing new to add from what went on in your packets. And I think the central office lease discussion is probably best at the end of the meeting after we go through the update on the central office space.
Agreed. Yeah. All right. Wow. Okay. Short and sweet, Morgan. That's great. All right, Lynn. So you're up now.
I should probably
Muted if you're talking.
Yeah, I should probably unmute, huh? Sorry. So the first up on the agenda is personnel. So you've already done this at each of your individual district board meetings. So I also need the SU to make a motion to ask me to direct me to send a letter to the CHEA president notifying him that the board may contemplate a reduction in force.
I will make that motion.
Okay, great. By roll, Jean Marie,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
Polly,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Mary is an aye, and Morgan, has Kevin joined yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so that's all ayes on that.
For the next one, I'm going to ask you to bring us into executive for a conversation about negotiations. We can either do it now, or if you want to save it until the end, we could do it then as well.
Lynn, why don't we do that at the end so that we could let everyone, administrators, go, and then do that maybe at the end of the board business?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of the legislative session, oops, I hid my notes here. Hold on one second. I just need to move my screen around. I'm using two screens and it's not very well for me. What are you seeing now?
Your Google Calendar.
Oh boy, you don't want to see that. Hold on one second.
Your calendar makes me nervous, Lynn. There's a lot in there. Whew.
My calendar makes me nervous too.
I mean, listen,
Okay.
Mary had to
I'm not-
roll me in to get me here tonight. Like, even with a good small calendar, I can't handle it.
That's funny. So I'm just going to talk for a bit without sharing my screen, if that's okay. Just in terms of the legislative update, I think there's, the legislative session is only underway. There are a lot of big topics that seem to be bubbling up that the legislators are going to be considering. I think that you have probably already gotten your first VSBA update, or you will be soon. I think of particular interest, what I learned about earlier today was that H48, the bill about annual meetings and sending out ballots to be able to mail those to all active registered voters, that did pass. So Morgan and I spoke about that earlier. We are kind of hoping that the district boards don't choose to do that unless that's something that the town boards are choosing to do. And I'm not hearing that any of the town boards in the area are moving in that direction. I'm not sure if any of you have heard that or not.
Lynn, I'm sorry. My
Oh.
sound kind of like went out for a second. Can you repeat the question as far as what you're asking about the select boards in the respective towns?
So because I said that very much too quickly, Mary, so thank you for stopping me. Because we have to do these meetings remotely and everything's going to be done by Australian balloting, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, some people are not going to want to come in person to vote, although those polls will still be open. There is the ability now with the bill that was just passed for towns and district boards to choose to mail out ballots to all active members that are on their voting. I can't even talk tonight. Their voting roll or roster. And all I was saying is I'm hoping that the district stays consistent and does what it is the towns are doing. And I'm wondering if people have heard within their communities if there's consideration to mass mail ballots.
I know Enosburg is request by mail, where they would have to contact the town clerk and request a mail-in ballot, like it's been in the past, but not a mass mailing.
And that's the default. So if you take no action and if the towns take no action, voters can request, or they can still come in and vote in person if there's any in-person hours there.
I know in Bakersfield, there's no in-person town meeting, and I've asked if there's going to be any sort of live stream, something or other. And so everything will be by ballot. How we get those ballots, I don't think they've gotten that far.
And that's true for all 6 of our towns this year.
Is it? Yeah.
Everyone will be by Australian ballot on town meeting day.
So I guess if we start hear that towns are planning, and Morgan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if we start to hear that towns are planning to send those out, is there some action that this board would need to do, or the district boards would need to do?
We would need to pull the district boards together if they wanted also to mail out ballots to everyone. And I don't know how we would thread that if one town decided that they wanted to mail to everybody on the checklist and the other town or towns decided they didn't, because we would need to treat all of our voters the same, even if that's spanning multiple towns with multiple different municipal level procedures.
I feel like we should follow the town's lead on this. Like, you would think that if they decide to mail the ballots, they would be one mailing with all of the ballots, including ours, or no? It would seem foolish for us or weird for us to mail to all of the registered voters our ballot, but not the other.
Correct.
I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure about the legality of that. If you're a district, and so you have you have your district voters in 2 different towns, and one town gets all their votes mailed to them and the other one doesn't, is that legal?
So it isn't, no, what I'm saying is it's not, so that in your case, if Richford decides to mail ballots to all of their voters and Enosburg doesn't, the Enosburg-Richford board is going to have to pick one or the other for both towns.
Okay.
Either we're missing the vote on the ballots going out in Richford and those voters are getting confused because they're getting one automatically and not getting the other automatically, or we're forcing Billy Joe to mail our ballots out to everyone, and her voters are getting confused because they're automatically getting one and not getting the other.
Okay.
So it
And
sounds like-
Morgan, the same goes for NMV. All 4 towns would have to have consensus around.
You, the NMV board, would have to treat all 4 towns the same.
Okay.
The 4 towns can do whatever they want, and that's why it gets a little sticky if they go in different directions.
Just
Would
to
it
chime
be-
in, Sheldon is doing the mail by request. Other than that, it's a drive-through vote, just so we're on the board.
Yep. I have not heard of any towns doing mailing ballots to everyone automatically, but I haven't, specifically asked that question to every town clerk.
I
just
can
think now
double
that
check
this
in
is passed-
Montgomery, but I think that Montgomery is like Sheldon. You can request
Yep.
the ballot, but I'll double check with Charlie and just make sure we're clear on that.
It would be good to know as soon as we can if any of you hear that from any of the towns, and I'm sure Morgan will check in with the clerks as well. But if we don't want to be managing all of those ballots if the towns are not managing those ballots. So the hope is that they will all consistently choose the same thing, but we're going to have to figure this out really quickly if they don't, I guess, is the moral of the story. Anything you want to add there, Morgan?
I think that's it. And again, it's not this board deciding, it'll be the district boards, but kind of wanted to give you a heads up.
So the next thing up is the weighting study. And that's something I think you're going to hear about and read about in the legislative session. And that has to do with the weights, the pupil weights in the formula. So it's really looking at, we've talked through this a little bit when we look at our equalized pupil counts. We know that each group of students has a different weight. So high school students cost more to educate, for example. So high school students' weights are 1 point, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but they're greater than an elementary student. A student living in poverty costs more to educate. A student who is an English language learner costs more to educate. A child who receives special ed services costs more to educate. So therefore, in the formula, those added weights are included when we're counting students. So there has been this weighting study that has been attached to Act 173. It's one portion of Act 173. And I think that we're going to see that cycle back through this year, and we're going to see an attempt at getting some momentum behind the UVM study that was done. Those weights have not been reviewed for quite some time. So there's a recommendation in a study that Tammy Colby did, I think her last name is Colby, from UVM to change those weighted measures and also to include some new factors. And the intention is to provide more equitable resources for kids throughout the state. So for example, if we're looking at this through the lens of schools that are educating students, a lot of students who are living in poverty, as an example, it's going to cost more to build the services that those students need to be able to get an equitable access or an equitable educational experience. So the weighting study is intended to have more of the money, more of that share of the money go towards those students and ultimately those communities. So the way this is likely going to shape up when it goes through the legislature is that there are going to be communities that, as a result of the weighting study, they would see some decreases in their funding because of the way their weights are recalculated and the students that they serve. There will be some other communities whose the revenue that they'll be receiving would look very different in a positive way because of the weight for the number of students, the type of students that they're serving. So the intention behind this, and this is something I just want to plan, I'm not going to go much further than this tonight, but the intention behind this is to use this as an equalizer so that if you're in one of those communities where your weights do come out in a place where there's more revenue going your way, the intention is not to use that as a tool or a mechanism to reduce the tax rate in the communities. It's not intended to be economic stabilization. It's intended to be providing greater equity around educational opportunity and experience. So it's going to be a heated, a debated part of what's going to go through the legislature this year. I think that there are a lot of people that are looking at it. I mean, you can't help but look at it through your own lens of how it will impact you and your work within each of your communities. And so I think that it's going to be, I'm hoping the legislature can get above that and can get to the place where we're looking at, if we believe that all students in Vermont deserve X, then here's how we think the weighting study can impact that. I acknowledge and recognize that this will be seen as some communities are going to win and some communities are going to lose in the recalculation of these weights. And at the same time, I also recognize that there are communities with high levels of poverty that have a much harder time approving a spending plan that would allow some systems to create equitable opportunities for their students. So just wanted to plant that seed in all of you as we see this start to trickle up to the top of what's happening in the legislature. We need to pay attention to that because I think that, you know, when it comes to this area, especially the Enosburg and Richford impact, this could be an opportunity for us to really shift and really start leaning in to those, the equity and the excellence. Remember, we talked about those 3 E's as we were going through Act 46. And, you know, I remember John Carroll saying to us, you all have the efficiency down, like your spending is really low. Let's focus on that equity and let's focus on that excellence. And that kind of goes into, you know, some previous conversations we've had as a board about what is it we want for all of our students. So the weighting study is something to really pay attention to.
So Lynn, I have a question. Is that the expectation? Is it being pitched to the legislature that this is not a mechanism to pay down tax rates? That this is not what a community will lean on in order to get those tax rates lower? Is that the understanding in the legislature or not?
I hope it will be. I don't know if it is yet, but it is not intended as an economic relief. And we'll lose if people approach it that way. If it's tempting, right? You all know the pressures of building a budget and seeing your tax rate and then, you know, looking desperately for ways to reduce your tax rates for your voters. But the intention behind this is about that equity and that excellence piece and providing opportunities in communities where it does cost more to educate certain groups of students. So I think that we'll completely miss the mark and the point of the weighting study if people are tempted at the local level to buy down rather than to invest in opportunity.
Well, I was just wondering, as far as if the legislature understands and supports, because, you know, we can sit here and sell it to a community that this is what this intention is, but if the rug gets pulled out from under us and the legislature is just like, oh, these towns have got more money, therefore they're gonna, you know, get less somewhere else, then that puts us in a really bad position. So it would be interesting to see if it was being sold to the legislature in that fashion and they bought it that way. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see how this goes, because I think that it's not, the interesting part is this is connected to several things. It's connected to the Act 173 when we're talking about, you know, how we're going to support students in the system, and, you know, rethinking special education funding, and, you know, the block grants for schools versus the census-based models. So it's tied to all of that. And at the same time, it has such a direct, you know, when Morgan does his description of our spending plan, and well, not the spending plan, but the first page when voters see it, where he really lays out, okay, this is your spending, this is your revenue, this is the impact your equalized pupil has, your yield, and so on and so forth. This has this weighting study has the ability to drastically positively impact some communities and drastically negatively impact some other communities. And we're in a point in time where that is probably not going to be very appealing to the communities who will be negatively impacted, because they're going to have to generate, without cutting programs, they would have to generate that in a different way. So I think that the reality is, we saw the impact of CLAs on our budgets this year. So you have the impact of CLAs, and then you have, through the weighting study, the impact of equalized pupil and the yield, all of that playing together. This, from my lens, in my view, the weighting study is incredibly important. From other people's viewpoints, it will be something that isn't favored by all. Let's put it that way, because of the impact it's going to, and it might lead us to the point in time where we say, okay, wait a minute, we believe in these priorities, but is there more we have to look at? Do we have to look more broadly at how we're calculating, how we're funding our education system in general? So might there be a greater look at education funding? I'm not sure, but this is a pretty important part of what they're going to be considering this year.
So Lynn, I have a quick question about that, just to kind of clarify. So with the kind of potential reallocation of revenue based on the weighting study and where they land, I mean, is it going to be less burdensome for the collective though, because we have merged budgets? So even if one particular school within a district somehow, you know, doesn't have as many students that the state deems with, you know, kind of marks with that heavy, the higher weight because of poverty or other factors, there may be another school in the district that is weighted more heavily, and aren't we kind of then still able to kind of share, you know, continue to share the resources amongst the schools?
So I think the way that you will see the impact of this is on the calculation when we work in the equalized pupil numbers. So I'm going to come to you with a draft in a normal year and say you've got NMV, you've got 960 equalized pupils. That's driving your tax rate to be X. Then I'm going to come to the next meeting and say the weighting study passed. You now have 980 pupils and your tax rate just dropped X number of cents, or you have only 880 pupils now and your tax rate has gone up. But that will be an equalized pupil number for the entire district.
And that's exactly the point in time that Polly was referencing when she asked her question. So when you see that impact of the change in the equalized pupil, that is the point in time where you have to say, the systems and supports we have in place and the opportunities we have in place for our students, we need to use those resources to provide more equitable opportunities for our students compared to others in the state. So Morgan and I have this conversation all the time, because he's the numbers person. You want him to be this way. When he sees that, he looks at it through the lens of where it impacts in the calculation, and that's super tempting. And at the same time, I'm going to be the person saying to you, remember, if our goal is this with our students, we need to think about what opportunities, how do we want to build our system? How do we want to ensure that our kids have what they need in order to be successful. So I'm going to be encouraging you to look at investing and thinking forward with that money through programming.
Yep, makes sense.
So I do want to say also about the legislative session there. I think every year there've been some big things. You know from being on the board, every year there've been some really big things that seem to be pretty centrally focused on education. And every year I think we all kind of hold our breath and go, maybe like, let's just finish up those things that were put on our plate last year before we get the new things added to the plate. And I think every year we kind of hope that's going to happen. And I don't think that's a likelihood at all this year. And certainly the pandemic has accelerated the need to talk about certain things, as has the financial picture of where we are with funding in the state of Vermont. So I think what we're going to see are some well-articulated priorities for the legislators to consider coming out of the AOE. I do know that tomorrow night the governor is slated to give his budget address. I'm expecting he might tip to some of those education priorities. And I think it'll be important to tune into, and we certainly can circle back to this the next time we meet or at your local meetings. But I do think there's a strong correlation there about his budget address and what we might see the AOE pushing for this year. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen because Courtney does such a good job of putting these pictures in. I want to make sure that I'm sharing them. So I'm going to talk through a little bit the work that we've done around Portrait of a Graduate. In just a second, I'm going to ask Jody to share her screen. I think that our goal for tonight is we're going to review the progress we've made to date on the Portrait of a Graduate. We're going to present a proposed timeline for completing the work for Portrait of a Graduate. And then I'm going to ask the board to confirm your intention, your goal of what this Portrait of a Graduate becomes.
Lynn, we can't see your screen. It's just black.
Wow. It was a really good picture, Courtney. I enjoyed it.
Speaking of, all of the pictures are previews of this month's challenge. So you're the first ones to see them.
Speaking of, I noticed, Jody, in your report, you had a link. I think Doreen's scanning the reports as PDFs, so we can't open any of those links. So I wonder if you could have Doreen attach any report that has links in them so that we could open them.
Yeah, I believe she also pulled the links out and put them into the body of the email.
Oh.
So they should be live, living in the body of the email that had the board notes attached to it.
No, you're right. You're right. Thanks.
Sure.
So Jody, could I have you start sharing your screen? Maybe you can be more successful at it than me. Perfect. So the hope for this presentation is to talk through, like I said, where we are, where we hope our next steps are going to be. So let's talk a little bit about process, Jody. I'll have you go to the next slide. So in the fall of 2019, you directed me to engage with Wendy Baker, who helped us through this process to facilitate the draft work of the Portrait of a Graduate. Wendy did a phenomenal job. She worked with you as board members and with a team of students from all throughout the SU, our newly merged SU at that point too, to engage communities in considering what skills and dispositions were needed for success in life. So last spring or /winter, right before COVID happened, you were presented with a draft of that work. So I'm hoping you're all able to put your eyes back on that. I know it's been a while. This has been stalled because of the pandemic. So I can click into the link a little later as well. So AOE has now, I think when we started this work, there wasn't much yet from the AOE about Portrait of a Graduate. And I think what was happening in a parallel time is the AOE was also doing Portrait of a Graduate work. So this is an articulation from the AOE about the purpose. So according to the AOE, the purpose of the Portrait of a Graduate is to identify those cognitive, personal, and interpersonal skills and abilities that students should be able to demonstrate upon graduation from our schools. And then that ties into proficiency-based graduation requirements. So currently in FNESU, we have a proficiency-based graduation system that is still rooted in credit and in attainment of transferable skills, proficiency and transferable skills. So we've been doing a lot of work within our system to be ready to make a shift towards the Portrait of a Graduate becoming the graduation priorities. So currently, like we said, the pandemic delayed the progress, and we knew we would not be able to give it the attention it needed with all of the other things that we were having to focus on. So we know that the educators need to engage with the draft of the Portrait of a Graduate. We know that one way that we can approach this, let me back up 1 second. Jody and I have re-engaged our thought process and our work with Wendy Baker. And I think that the three of us are feeling pretty good about a timeline that we've created about how we might approach this process. So this is kind of unpacking that timeline at this point. So what we would like to do next is to engage a discovery work group to consider the driving question in bold that you see there. What might it look like if we aligned all of our K-12 FNESU-wide curriculum and proficiency work with the draft Portrait of a Graduate? So we'd be having that work group reviewing those connections in the curriculum and the instruction and the structure, the policy, everything, to see how that would connect to the Portrait of a Grad. We would ask them to do this work and report back to the SU board for your April 21st meeting. We'd ask them to identify some of those easy alignments that they're able to articulate and recommend any amendments to the Portrait of a Graduate draft, and any substantial systems shifts that would need to occur in order for us to implement this effectively. So on the next slide, there is, Jody, could you click into the Portrait of a Grad draft just to remind people what that looks like? So the students did a tremendous amount of work, and what they came up with were these characteristics on the side that they believe that an FNESU graduate should be information savvy, emotionally intelligent, trustworthy, financially literate, a contributor, a creative thinker, and an independent decision maker. And so it's been pretty interesting to look at that work and to look at the work that we have already done within our system and kind of crosswalk and see all of the really neat intersections between their work and the work that has already been going on. So next in here is the link to the Vermont Portrait of a Graduate, just so you can get a sense of when Vermont engaged students and community members, they came up with the following for a Portrait of a Graduate: learner agency, global citizenship, academic proficiency, well-being, critical thinking and problem solving, and communication. So the next part is about, the purpose, once we could articulate a Portrait of a Graduate, is that we would use this kind of as our guiding light, and we could create goals and priorities that are specific to the FNESU Portrait of a Graduate. And you hear us talk a lot within the organization about our continuous improvement plans, and we're trying to align our continuous improvement plans so that the systems level continuous improvement plan is aligned, and the school level continuous improvement plans are aligned to the organizational level. So this portrait of a graduate would align and we'd be able to produce a plan that looks, this is Jody showing you a sample, a really good sample from the AOE website. And I think this is from Windsor Central. So this is taking that portrait of a graduate and really articulating what do they need to do in order to make this a reality? What are their action steps and goals? And moving forward, I guess what we're looking for tonight is for you to just tell us, are we on the right path? Are you thinking in these terms? I know that you've been very committed and engaged with the portrait of a grad work. So our pending final approval, we're expecting that, you know, the educators are going to take a look at it and make some recommendations about the draft. Are we on the right path in terms of our thinking that this could become our proficiency-based graduation requirements, and that we could develop a multi-year plan to transition our systems towards this new graduation requirement? So I'm gonna keep going, and I want you to just kind of let that simmer in there. If that's the direction, and that's what you're thinking the vision is for this work, between April and June, if the board decided in April, yes, you know, we're committed to this, this looks like the right direction, we feel like if all the kids who graduate from FNESU, you know, understand and can demonstrate proficiency in this portrait of a graduate work, that this is the right path for us. So if we would get the go-ahead from the SU board in April, then we would interact with the discovery work group. We would have this discovery work group come together, and their charge would be creating a plan, the draft timeline and process for how do we get the system that we're in now aligned with the portrait of a graduate, and they would be making recommendations and revisions to anything that still would need to happen with the portrait of a graduate. Wendy would be helping to facilitate this work right through to the end process, which I think is very important. I think that she's been very useful in aligning kind of the community's thinking, the board's thinking, the students' thinking, and I think she'll be very useful and helpful in getting the educator groups together to be able to look at this and think about this through the systems lens. The discovery group would present a plan to the SU board in June, and then pending support, there would be an implementation team that would assemble, and they would do that work over the summer. And you know, we talked about the importance of the membership and the implementation team being the just right people, having the just right expertise in order to identify, you know, that system work that needs to happen. Additionally, there might be subcommittees that come as a result of the work of the implementation team that would need to meet to address various aspects of the systems work, and then develop clearly articulate a plan for how we would implement each part of that. The implementation team would report back to the SU board in August, and then make a final recommendation to the board to adopt the portrait of a graduate characteristics as they look at that time, as well as any associated agreements as FNESU begins the 21-22 school year. So that is what we have come up with. The wonder is, are we heading in the right direction? Is that the vision that the board had was for us to take this work and to really make this a living, breathing vision and guiding light for the organization?
So here are my thoughts. I think that the time and effort that the students have put into this is just so incredibly valuable, and really appears to be very much spot on. Like, they know what they think they need, and I think, from, you know, with my higher education perspective hat on, I think they're right about a lot of that. And so I think our biggest part of that to the side, like, we need to value the effort that they put in. So I think it's great work, and I want to continue to move forward with it. I'm concerned that I'm concerned about the workload for our staff and everyone else who would be helping with this. So sort of that pandemic exhaustion in there as well. So it's not that I don't want us to move forward. It's more of, I want to move forward, but I also want to sort of, understand and give leeway if necessary, for sure.
I was feeling the exact same, like this is great work. I think we're definitely in the right lane. But your timeline definitely seemed tight. That's a lot of work to do by June. That's what I was thinking. And you don't want necessarily a rushed document. You want a well thought out document. So that would be my only caveat too, is it seemed tight.
I would echo what others just said. I mean, I think that I'm absolutely on board with, I mean, the one, just to back up, the work the students did in the small groups is really impressive. There's some pieces from the state website that you showed that I'd love to see also integrated in, and it's a really kind of dynamic and holistic approach to kind of educating in this kind of time we're in. And it seems a little ambitious, but it's not really for me to say what's too much for for you all. Your capacity and kind of what everyone's kind of respective capacities are to kind of tackle and move forward with it. It seems, Lynn, what I'm also hearing from you is like at some levels, it's a really like fundamental kind of re-examining starting at kindergarten all the way through 12th grade of how we kind of educate the whole child. And so, seems really ambitious, but the goals are really laudable because we're trying by the time our kids each child gets to 12th grade to really send them out with this kind of skill set and ability to move forward in the world, that best supports their strengths and what they want to see for their futures. So, I'm just curious how, from a curriculum standpoint, when you're really looking at that breadth of K through 12, how much kind of deep curriculum kind of overhauling or not is going to be kind of required to really like find that, yes, by the time our kids are graduating and we're handing them their diplomas, they really have this kind of not only the academic proficiencies, because we're all identifying there is so much more to a successful kind of life beyond high school than just mere academic proficiencies.
The beautiful part of this work, and Jody, I'm going to want you to jump in after this. The beautiful part of this work is this doesn't reset us. It actually is this is the center linchpin that we need to accelerate the work that we've already been doing. So I think that what's key to remember is we've been bringing you work for multiple years now around priority standards and a vertically articulated and aligned curriculum. And we've been, really working through the systems and structures and what do we need in place in terms of schedule, what do we need in place in terms of support so that we can make sure that we have the capacity to get students where they need to go. And I think that the one piece that feels like a barrier still is that our system is still credit-based at the high school level. And so even though the law says that you can't, like we're still meeting the expectations of the law, but it gets in our way because it's still too much of a focus on seat time and hours, and it confuses things. So if we're feeling like all of this work has come together, and it will tell you that I feel like we've got these race horses in the crowd and they're at the gate, and if somebody doesn't push the button soon, they're just gonna jump over the gate, right? Like they're ready to go with this work because they've been the work that they've been doing has been leading up to this moment for a long time. I think that the beautiful part of it is it's looking at how do we ensure that continuum, right? The work that we've already been doing in terms of the vertical articulation is set up in a way that we can be demonstrating proficiency with kids rather than talking about, well, they completed second grade, or well, they passed their chemistry class or their algebra class. What we can be doing instead is reporting out and focusing our time and attention on those proficiencies instead. So Jody, I know you have lots more to make that even a better statement.
Well, I think you really explained that concisely and correctly, Lynn. Gab and I started on this group, on a large work group from the SU back in 2014. So our SU really has been engaged in this work since then. And we have a lot of assets already in our system that will lend themselves to making the transitions that we need to. What really is holding us back, as Lynn said, was the structural work around the graduation requirements being credit-based. So we do have some educators who are ready, chomping at the bit to engage in this work. Part of our thinking around the timeline was that we do have 2 fairly large breaks, one in February, one in April. And because people aren't traveling, there might be a little more accessibility, a little more time to engage in the work in that thoughtful way that you were talking about earlier. Just kind of give them a little more space and a little more bandwidth because again, people aren't tending to be going anywhere over February break. So, if they could have some time to have some downtime and really catch their breath and rest a little bit, they might be very excited to take a deep dive into this work. And I think, we could always put it out there. And if it's not realistic, then we adjust the timeline.
And I think the other
also in terms of the question about what kind of lift would it mean in terms of aligning the curriculum, Mary, that you asked? Again, we have been sort of moving in that direction slowly since 2014, but I think that really would be a big piece of the meat of the discovery group as well, to report back to us in April to say, where are there places that are easy alignment and where are there some places that we would need to make some substantial changes over time?
I think a good example of that is how the kids really honed into the financial literacy piece and saying, like, nobody's really teaching us about this. Like, we're not getting to interact with these ideas. And so looking at that through the lens of there is work that we could do from start to finish with the system that we can build upon some concepts and skills over time. So it is kind of an exciting time. And I think that the portrait of a graduate, like I said, it feels like the linchpin in the middle. And once we have that and we know what are those priorities and what are we committed to ensuring in terms of the proficiency-based graduation requirements, I think that the staff is
2 other assets that we have that we've really been putting a lot of time and effort and energy into is the work that Michelle, Lynn, and I have been doing collaboratively around building a system that would ensure that we have a way to get kids to proficiency, making sure that we have a system to identify exactly what students are struggling with if they are not becoming proficient at the rate that we would expect them to, and having systemic ways to address the kind of guided practice feedback loop that students would need in order to get there. Also, having Nick with us and in his social emotional coordinator role is really another key asset, because when you look at some of the characteristics that the students came up with, they really are rooted in that social emotional learning realm. And so having Nick on board and having him already having been working with a team, of people and starting down that road of looking at how do we teach those skills, how do we assess those skills, how do we identify students who are not making the kind of proficiency progress that we would expect, and what are we going to do about that, is another asset that we kind of do already have in place. So it's been a long journey now of many years, over many years of making these steps toward that change and that transition. And I feel like we're really pretty well positioned. Not that we could make that change overnight, obviously, but I feel like we're well positioned to have a team of people to really dive in and analyze and do that crosswalk and report back to you in a fairly timely manner to say, here's where we're at, and here are things that we could change quickly, and here are some things that are going to need some more time.
I think I can speak for the board to say, we certainly don't want to hold you back. We just want to protect you if, you know, if Lynn's pushing too hard. So don't, you know, we don't want to keep that. We're, you guys are like, let us out of the gate. And we're like, are you sure? So if you're sure, then, you know, if you want a motion to move forward, there's so much goodness in the work that you are all doing. And as long as the timeline seems comfortable to all of you, then, you know, have at it as far as I'm concerned.
I think we do our best work when we push ourselves right to the brink of that discomfort, right? Like, you know, are we all busy? Of course, but is this a really important, urgent priority for us in terms of a system? Yes. And I think that by moving and getting really clear in terms of what the board's vision is and what the board's goals are, it's going to help the rest of the work come back together, because like Jody said, we've been on this journey for many years now. And then we've really been taking those steps to be ready for this moment for several years. And I feel like we're there and we're ready. And I think that us not trying to be aggressive with timeline right now would be a misstep. We might tell you that there are some other things that we don't have time to do instead, but that's a conversation for a different day. Are there other questions, comments, thoughts?
No, that's great. Lynn, do you feel like you needed a specific mode? I mean, it's not really, you don't need an action, just kind of the support of the board to move forward as you see fit.
Yeah, I just need to hear from you. Like, are we jumping in? Are we heading in the right direction? Is this the vision of the board?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I can't speak for the board. I can say for myself, I think it's excellent. It's an excellent vision. That
Yes,
seems
supportive.
to be what everyone thinks that's spoken so far, for sure.
Is there anybody that has concerns that they would like to bring up?
Can you get it done by July?
I think we can try to get it done by August. I think that we're
I was kidding.
Yeah,
okay.
I think what he's saying, Lynn, is just massage the time. There you go.
Like, my heart is palpitating. I think that the implementation team might come back with a multi-year plan to roll this in phases too. So I don't think necessarily you're going to see, you know, ready to flip a switch in August. I think that we're going to have to be strategic about how this plays out.
And Lynn, I also just wanted to mention that I think that there a heads up to the board members that there may be a need and a role for board members on the implementation team, particularly if the discovery work group identifies policy things. You know, there might be a place where we would need some of you for some summer work as well to take a look at some of those pieces as well.
Oh, no. We didn't sign up for more work.
Rick did.
We're happy behind the gate. Thank you. We'll wait here.
I would actually be happy to do it.
Great. Fantastic. We have a note of that. We have it on tape.
Courtney is the note taker, and she jotted it down. Okay, so that's helpful. Thank you for listening, and thank you for kind of giving us that feedback. And I think that feels very, very good for all of us. So next up, kind of a perfect alignment, I think, to this conversation is we have a board retreat that we are planning. Can you see my screen where it says board retreat planning? Yes, okay. So we have Mike DeWeese all kind of geared up to do this work with the board. So Mike has asked for some feedback about what's the work, what does the board hope to accomplish? So I've tried to create a brainstorm, and this, you can say you're wrong, this isn't the right direction, this is your work. So gleaning it from the work that we've done around Portrait of a Graduate and some of the things I think I have heard from you in terms of priorities, I'm hoping we can identify the outcomes that you're hoping to get out of a board retreat. So I think that one of the things that I think we've talked about are kind of those common beliefs and what are we hoping that we're all committed to here. And we just talked with you about the Portrait of a Graduate and working through that idea of that becoming the guiding light and being able to articulate the purpose and connection to that. And then having that drive your mission, vision, decision-making work of the board. So as you're making decisions in the future, do you want to think about what do you want to use for criteria for making your decisions? What should you be basing that on? Does that have a connection to your priorities that you're going to be developing? And then I hope one of the outcomes from my standpoint is that the board walks away from that retreat with some goal setting done. So what am I in the right ballpark with what you're thinking of for the board retreat? Are there things that you don't like on there? Things that you want added?
I like
I think
it.
that looks great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I will get back to Mike. You're struggling a little with the screen share, Courtney. I'm just going to apologize to you because you did a good job with the pictures, but I'm done with the screen sharing. It's too confusing between two screens.
And we had no date yet from Mike, right, though? Right.
I do not have a date. I'm going to put that on my designee sheet. I tried to get a date from, well, I didn't try to get a date from Mike. I tried to get confirmation from Mike, and we're going to come back together. We weren't able to do that over the break, but we will come back together and get that done. So just shifting now into COVID, you know, we can't have a meeting without talking about COVID in the middle of a pandemic. So I explained to you in your district meetings that the FFCRA leave expired, and they kind of left they left the tax relief piece of FFCRA in place until March 31st. And schools were told you can figure out how you're going to handle your leave requests. You also can, was I glitching? Morgan must be. You can figure out how you're going to handle your leave requests, or you can keep the language of the FFCRA. So that leave was expiring on March 31st. The entitlement expired on December 31st. So we have been working with the union to come to agreements on how we're going to handle leave between now and the end of the year. And we think we're very close to having an agreement with the union. I think that is, you know, a respectful agreement, you know, taking into consideration the time and place we're in right now with all the reasons why people are unable to be able to come to work these days. So I know that both Jamie and Morgan have been helping with that kind of back and forth. So the hope is that we'll have an MOU, a memorandum of understanding between administration and the union, I hope by the end of this week is my intention. So I didn't know if anybody had any questions specific to that.
Did you want to tip us of what the deal is or no?
I can.
If you don't want to, it's okay. As long as it sounds like you guys are working hard to come to an agreement, so I trust all the sides.
It's not a done deal yet, but one of the things I guess I can tip you at a high level that, you know, it isn't a guarantee in the way your master agreement language is written that people can access sick leave when they're not actually sick. So we made sure that that provision was in there so that if someone has to quarantine because they've been a close contact or they're taking care of someone who has COVID. We made sure that there are protections in place there for our teachers so that they're not in this situation where they're unpaid during those periods and they don't have a way. You know, it would be kind of, I would look at it as harm on top of harm. Like, everybody's living through this tough time and they've earned these sick days, and we want to make sure that they're there for them to use whenever it's appropriate to use them. The one piece that's been, you know, really important when we've looked through this is the applying the leave that they have available to them when it falls into those qualifying categories for I'm symptomatic, or I'm a close contact, or actually if I get COVID. But the one place where I don't think it makes sense, and you know, we've been very clear with the union, is if someone has a situation where they have to be out, but it isn't because they were a close contact to someone or they're symptomatic, it's because they've traveled or it's because they've gathered in a large group, those aren't going to qualify for sick day use in what we have proposed. So if people do have personal time, that's something that's the only leave they really could use for that, unless they fall into a job category where they have vacation time. And then I think that the other pieces are really about, if you do fall into these categories and you have to take leave, you can't just jot out your 14 days. We'll let you take your sick day, but you need to make reasonable attempts to go get tested on day 8 so that you can return to work as soon as possible. And then there is a provision that we're considering around if there are new employees that maybe don't have sick leave available to them, if they get, you know, if they're a close contact twice between now and the end of the year, that, you know, we have some language in the master agreement that people can donate days for FMLA qualifying events. So we're just thinking of turning that language into it. Also could be used for the same events in this MOU that would allow sick day use. The other piece that we put in here was that teachers could, if they're able to work remotely, as determined by their building principal, they can work remotely rather than having to draw down sick days. So that's kind of the high level of what, well, more than high level. I gave you a lot of details. Any questions on that?
I like it. It seems very fair and seems to follow the, you know, the guidance from the CDC. So I think it's good. I like it.
We also were very clear in the MOU that it would expire if there's a new leave that comes at the federal or state level, that this would expire if the governor declares the end of the state of emergency or once we reach June 30th. So it doesn't set any precedent for future. Then I think that if there are no COVID related questions, that's it for me.
Great, thanks, Lynn.
I did have one question. Sorry, this is a little bit off topic. I couldn't, when the last email that you sent that was like the general COVID summary update as a Google Doc, I couldn't get into it. And I kind of was like, it's just fine. But could anyone else get in it? Or was there anything exciting in there?
There was nothing exciting. It was just notifying you of the, so I've been trying to be responsive to the feedback that I get from throughout the organization. And you guys know that there's been a lot of communication out of my office. And I think what I was hearing was there's so much, and there people are kind of saturated with the communication that they're almost missing stuff in the communication because they're no longer reading it all carefully. So rather than every time there's a case, me sending it out, I send it out to the school that it's impacting. And then at the end of the week, I'm just going to send a summary, just a quick email summary that says, you know, we had this number of cases in these schools this week. So that's what it was. I can make sure that you get a copy of it, Jean Marie.
Did other people, could anybody else access? It said I had to, you know how it'll say you have to request access from the author?
Yeah,
That's the message.
I couldn't but I couldn't remember if I had a special Gmail account for the FNESU. And that's why I couldn't access it, because it told me the same thing. I have 2 or 3 Gmail accounts and I can't
Yeah.
remember which one I had access and which one I didn't. If I didn't know the answer to that question, I was going to actually ask somebody that later.
So you do all, maybe we can send out some information to all of you. You do have an FNESU email account, and our intention was to make you go live with that on July 1st. This year, I think we talked about it last year, and we didn't pull that switch.
Right. I guess the
that we would
question
only
is, and
send
maybe this is a Dom question, is, so for instance, when I just went to open up the portrait of the graduate work, I got the same thing, request for access. If I did use my FNESU email, would I not have to request access? Okay, great. Okay.
Weird, because I could get into it and I don't have an FNESU email going on. Weird.
Oh.
So I
Weird.
think there's some operator error going on in this, because I also could have set the sharing priorities appropriately, and then you all would have been able to access it. So I'll work on that and attend to that a little better in the next communication.
Okay, sweet. Anything else for Lynn? All right, so then moving on to board business, any particular future agenda items that we want to go over now? No? Okay, so let's do a little discussion on central office space needs. And Courtney has something that she can screen share that'll help kind of launch the conversation.
Oh, okay.
Frame it a little bit. Or
Let me-
Morgan, whoever can do
I can do it.
that.
That's okay.
Great.
Nope, never mind. Morgan beat me.
So maybe before we just dive into this, just to back up just a little bit, it would, I guess, be a good idea. I'm happy to share the couple of things that I have gleaned in the last, stretch since we talked last. And Polly, I had a question for you around the armory space, because I did reach out to the select board chair, but did not hear back from him. So it'd be helpful if you have any kind of update on that. When I reached out to him, it was really just to kind of ask for kind of an honest assessment of the likelihood or not of that space, really working for us as far as what the intentions of the town are. I don't know if you have any insight about where things stand with the conversation, if all the kind of relevant players in Enosburg around the armory space.
Well, so we finally, as a board, went into the building with the maps to figure out square footage and what we would need. Now, because the community center is not using the Monteith House anymore, they have to be relocated. And so that's what we were unsure of in the beginning, is exactly what the needs of the community center would be, or at least the rec director. So once we kind of plotted that out, it definitely would eat up, if in fact central office needed as much space as the originally came for, it would impede that original assessment of what your space needs would be. There was some talk about leaving, there's a very large open space in the middle of that building, leaving that maybe for kind of conference room space that could be utilized by people in the community. And when I say conference room, it's a pretty large room. So there's like that, but as far as like this original space you needed, it would be tight, if not not doable.
Okay. So so it sounds to me as though we really could potentially cross that off our list of potential options, that it's just kind of in conflict with what the broader needs for the Enosburg community are around that space.
If in fact, yeah.
Just to be clear, that was putting in an extra floor. Did you guys talk about that or no?
We did not talk about that. That was not something that the town was gonna participate in, but we did say, like, if there was another floor, this might work. But if with the present layout and this space needs, if you're sticking with what you originally wanted, it doesn't look like it would fit. But we did not talk about this.
Polly, do you think that it would be worth continuing a conversation around that second floor, or that's kind of a non-starter at this point?
I think you could continue that conversation. I mean, to broach that subject about, what you guys would want to put in as far as money to make that happen. But yeah, it's always up for conversation, I believe.
Okay. All right. And so I guess now, sorry, Courtney, I kind of jumped the gun there with having you screen share and then backtracked a little bit just to kind of get that update from Polly on the Armory. I certainly don't have too much that was kind of positive or really like fruitful to report. I did reach out to a really nice woman who's a real estate broker down in the Burlington area. She was the listing broker for a couple of the Main Street office spaces in Enosburg. But by the time I spoke with her, they had already been scooped up by another business. She does have all of our needs kind of assessment, and she and I have been going back and forth quite a bit. And, as a broker, what she kind of works on behalf of the person looking to rent their space. So there isn't a cost on our end to working with her. It's almost like being kind of a headhunter for realty on behalf of her clients. So she did mention the name Diana Benoit. Don't know if folks in the Enosburg community are familiar with her. I don't know of her as a local realtor who may have some good potential kind of insights into the commercial real estate market in Enosburg. So I'm happy to reach out depending on where we land at the end of the conversation. I could reach out to her if folks want to pursue that avenue. And so Morgan, I guess it would be helpful at some point for you to share a little bit about the old pharmacy space, but maybe let's look at Courtney's slides first, and then we'll continue that part of the conversation.
Okay. So can you see that big slide there?
Not yet.
Central office locations?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. All right. And I don't actually know how to move around on this one. There we go. So this is sort of the layout of our district currently. This red point here is where central office is, and then the 6 purple dots are each of the 6 elementary schools. So that'll just give you a kind of a graphic overview of some of the discussions we're having around centrality. And then Courtney worked this graph up. 80 Main Street is our office in Richford, and then she's got a line for each of the 6 elementary schools. So you can see reading across and down the distance from each elementary school to 80 Main Street now, and then the distance between the elementary schools. So I think, none of this is any information that should come as a surprise to someone. But I think it maybe gives a little bit of data to what folks are feeling, especially those coming from Sheldon and Bakersfield. And then we started taking the places that are in the mix and try to come up with a way that we can compare them to each other across some of the criteria that you've identified in meetings past. So I think we've added broadband access, and that's one that is obviously a need if we're going to relocate. 5,500 square feet is roughly what we decided we would need in an ideal world. Parking, handicap access, centrality, and then we added a column, ease of transition, and there's still a lot of question marks here, but that would incorporate what sort of build out the building would need, how much of a time frame we would need in order to transition from one place to another, and then looking at whether it's worth continuing to pursue that option. So I shot through that kind of quickly, and I don't know how to go back on this. So given those two things, are there any questions?
Can you make sure I know where all these places are? Like, I think I know where Scoozy's is.
Sure.
Would you do that, Morgan?
Yep. So Scoozy's is the old furniture store in East Berkshire. So it's where 105 and 118 split off from each other. The Tague block is formerly known as the Berkson block, and that's the strip mall that has the Chinese restaurant in Enosburg. And there are two spaces in that building that are open and contiguous to each other. The Pearly block is the old pharmacy building in Enosburg. So that's the building between the Notch and the Flying Disc. The Armory is the Armory in Enosburg. And People's Plaza is the large building across the driveway from Richford Elementary.
And I suppose it kind of bears mentioning, it's interesting that each, especially the last three, the Pearly block, the Armory, and the People's Plaza, each kind of comes along with a unique kind of hurdle. We've identified with the Armory that probably one of the largest hurdles is whether the town of Enosburg would even want to, have us in there, given the kind of competing interests from other community groups. And then you can add the hurdle of building an entire second floor, which seems as though that would be the only practical way to kind of meld the need for community space and that being central office space. So those seem like, kind of two unique hurdles to the Armory space. The People's Plaza, one of the biggest hurdles is this complexity around the ownership of the building, and whether the towns of Enosburg and Richford would be able to convince their voters to pass a bond to purchase that building, and then we would rent from those towns. So, there are a lot of complexities around that. And the Pearly
Morgan,
block. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, are all of the Tague block and the Pearly block, are those renters or purchase?
So the Tague block would be rented, and it's on this list, even though it doesn't have adequate space, primarily because there's several storefronts in there. And so I think if that was an option that we were going to take seriously, we would be doing it with the idea that we'd hope that there would be an additional storefront worth of space that opened up in the future. I asked the owner if he thought that was likely in the near term, and he didn't. But I think it's still valuable to at least keep that option on our radar. And then the Pearly Block would also be a rental arrangement, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But People's Plaza is the only one where we would need to effect some sort of change in ownership before we moved into it.
Is there any idea what to do about the parking for the Pearly Block? Where would you guys park?
So there are some ideas, and I'll touch on that when I go over it.
Okay.
I think there's a solution there.
Well, Morgan, this may be a good time to kind of dive into the Pearly Block, if you want to kind of give us a summary of that.
Sounds good. And so just to kind of close the loop on People's Plaza, this is one of the advantages of it is that it's 10,000 square feet. So we've had conversations in the past around an alternative program site, around trying to figure out daycare for staff. And there certainly would be a lot of easy options there at People's Plaza. The challenge, as Mary pointed out, is that we would need to get a sale approved. It would be a fairly significant property that would come off the Richford Town tax rolls. And so I think politically you'd get some pushback on that. And it is currently fully rented or nearly fully rented. So you'd also theoretically being displacing some of those folks. Lynn and I did get inside the first floor of the Pearly Block. And again, this is that brick building just south of the new Notch building in Enosburg. It is essentially a 75-foot by 75-foot square. And that first floor is divided into 2 rooms. So about 2/3 on one side and 1/3 on the other. And if folks had ever been in the pharmacy and the craft shop, it really doesn't look all that much different than it did when those two real places were in there. It's currently basically a big empty space, and so there would be some build out. It would be probably a little bit easier than the Armory, maybe not as easy as People's Plaza in terms of doing that work. There's some deferred maintenance that we would want to happen before we really invested in that downstairs area, but it didn't look like it would be that bad. There is also an outbuilding attached to the back that would give us some additional storage space. It's rough and unheated, so it wouldn't be ideal for everything, but we could certainly store some things in that space back there. The interesting thing with that block is it's currently owned by someone who lives out of the region down in Addison County. He is interested in renting it, and he is also interested in selling the building. So I had approached him with the idea of renting that space. He seemed willing to approach us with that. I think we could negotiate with him in terms of build out cost and doing some kind of cost share for that. But when we spoke with the realtor, or former realtor who showed us the space, we learned that there's a group in Enosburg that is also considering buying the building. And so I approached them to figure out what their plans were. And they, if they're successful, it would be actually quite a good connection with us. Were originally thinking of rehabbing the building. There are apartments on the second floor, which they would keep if they owned it, and the current owner has those rented out. And then there's also a third floor that encompasses the entire building. So they were considering putting in a mix of some potentially some retail in those front storefronts, and then a childcare facility in the downstairs, and hadn't really considered the third floor space. So in conversations today, it came up that they will be putting an elevator in the building for access to those second-story apartments anyway. They could just as easily put an elevator up to the third floor, and we would essentially have, again, a big empty space that would be ripe for build out. I'm hoping to get into that space sometime in the next couple of weeks. We didn't know that it really had existed. I assumed that there were more apartments up there. But I think that may be an interesting match, because as they are talking with the group that would do the build out and get the grant money to do the historical preservation work, it would certainly be to their advantage to have a long-term lease in place with a so-called anchor tenant. And the build out work, I think, would be more significant under them than if we were going into a building where the owner really would still like to sell it and we're trying to fix up that downstairs space. Down the road, there may be some connections as well with the idea of them trying to subsidize a daycare in there, because as you have heard in this board and in your local boards, daycare for us is a pretty significant workforce issue in terms of our employees and they're needing daycare up here. So there may be an interesting connection there.
So that I think there's a multi-layer potential future interesting connection, because I think, when we talked about teacher retention and recruitment, the retention piece about the daycare is certainly something that makes sense, that we focus that way to try to keep our staff here. But also that idea of, if we could be a part of that daycare, is there a way to recruit some of the kids that are in our schools now to consider work in the education and human resources field, which have huge just gaps in the workforce. So I think it could be mutually beneficial on a few levels.
The parking, what you were going to bring up something about the parking thing there, Maureen?
Oh, yes. There are some spots that are currently being basically given to Champlain Chevy that would come with that building. They also feel like if they're doing this work in the back, there are spots for the tenants, but nothing is lined out. So they're feeling like if they actually went out and paved it and dropped lines down, they might double the number of spots that are out there. There's some, benefit to the tenants leaving during the day for work at the same time we're coming into work. There is also the municipal lot, which is just between the Somerset and the Opera House. So that's a short walk away. But the impression I got was that they thought they could get about 12 spots out of it for us. And depending on who's doing the walkthrough next week, I'll have them walk through the grounds as well.
Okay, perfect. So you'd probably leave some of those 5 or 6 spots there for visitors anyway, and most of you would end up parking in the municipal lot?
Probably.
And I think that, that kind of segues a little bit when we're talking about the parking, going back to, if we look at that if we look at the slide with all the X's and green checks of the priorities, so it would be helpful, I think, to hear from, folks on the board, when we're starting to really dive into these spaces, what does feel most important to each of us. And, and certainly I think we've heard a lot, from Lynn and from Morgan, what some of the kind of driving factors are around the search. But it'd be nice if we could somewhat get on the same page. And I think that the thing that has somewhat felt awkward for me in the process is kind of trying to a little bit tiptoe around this centrality issue, because I'm really cognizant of this kind of the dynamic with the town of Richford, and that it is hard for us to potentially pull anchor from Richford. But I also think it's important to remember that it's a bit of a vestige of a bygone era being based in Richford. It is from a time when we were not we were not spread out across all these different districts and towns, and the mileage is really telling, and the first map is really telling that you can draw pretty much a nice even circle around from all the schools in the surrounding districts, with Enosburg in the center. And especially for Sheldon and for Bakersfield, I'm very sensitive to that distance. But certainly there are other factors that are, that are important. So I think it would be helpful, to just hear from others where folks land in that prioritization as we kind of do these next kind of steps around the search.
I think we can pull the first two off the list. I mean, they clearly don't meet the needs of what we need.
Yeah, I think
Space, parking.
pull the first three, because if you don't have enough space, then I don't think that it's that's the reason we're having this conversation, really. So, the Teague block may eventually have enough space, but for right now it doesn't. So I don't think that makes much sense.
I think it'll be enough of a hassle to move you one time. You don't want to move twice.
Exactly.
Well,
Was that Polly? I think you're muted, Polly.
it block, like, I know pretty large space for like when you have district trainings and that. And that's why I kind of stated about that big open space at the Armory, that, maybe if you utilize that kind of space for your trainings or your district work, and then keep other spaces for your office. I didn't know if that still would be enough space. It might not be. In the Teague block anyway.
Well, currently there's nothing in the Teague block. The two spaces that were available as of last week, or 2 weeks ago, when I spoke with Meg McGovern, they're no longer available. But that's not to say others. Oh no, wait.
No, that's the DePatie block.
Right, that's the DePatie block. I'm right. Sorry, Polly. Morgan, what was the square footage of the spaces in the Teague, in the Berkson, the mall?
So the two spaces together were about 3,200.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we could go over the wish list and kind of pull out what we might be able to access at a place like the Armory. I don't know that we would come up with 2,000 square feet. But
yeah, that's a pretty big difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to go back to the Armory, there isn't going to be enough space in there for the SU offices to move into, but there's a suggestion that we add a second story to that building instead.
So not exactly. The Armory, is basically a big open room with two wings on the side. And when we did a walkthrough and looked at some of the space, we could get to about 4,500 square feet if we took half of that drill room and then one of the sides and a couple offices in the front. What we could do is we could put a second story inside of that drill room. It gets a little tricky because then you have to deal with handicap access, which is either ramp or an elevator, and do some of the work around that. But there certainly is the potential to fit in 2 stories inside that place. but nobody would be building on top of the existing building.
I also really like the idea of renting.
You do or do not?
I do.
I do too.
Yeah, I think right now our communities and voters are not going to really be super interested in us going forward with a, hey, would you like to, get another bond for this, that, or the other? So I'm in favor of the old pharmacy building. I've gone through an Office of Civil Rights review, and I'm super sensitive to all the ADA stuff because of that. Like the third floor doesn't really excite me, but as long as there's an elevator there, I'm all for it. What else was I gonna say? Oh, I'm a little bit concerned about the parking. Like, I would prefer that there was enough parking sort of curbside for you, that you aren't expected to walk a block away. I mean, I don't know exactly how far that is, but it's a little bit of a distance. And when it gets dark at 4 o'clock at night, I know I wouldn't want to be making that walk alone. So, and here we are at like 9 o'clock, and I know some of you are in the office still. So that's my only concern with that space, or my only two concerns.
So I can certainly try to get a better handle on that at the next visit to that building.
Great. So it seems as though there's definitely kind of people are more amenable. The board is more amenable to a rental situation, and it'd be helpful to hear. I mean, it seems also as though, I know Kevin isn't with us, and I know he's a strong voice for Richford, but what I'm getting this sense from others is that the centrality of Enosburg does resonate as a wise choice. Is that safe to say? Okay.
Yeah, I think those charts that Courtney put together just really accentuate that point for us. It's important for us to move forward. Like you mentioned, Mary. The other thing I think about, when the NMV board came together, we really realized that we weren't all snuggled together as a little clump of towns. And so we talked for quite a while about potentially having our meetings in Enosburg because they were a central location. So we already knew this in the back of our minds, that Enosburg was in the middle of everything. And so it just, to me, makes a lot of sense, and maybe is the right time to go ahead and make that move.
So I'm thinking too, as far as parking, the DePady block has an underground parking garage for all of the people who reside in that building. And then they have a large parking lot in the back of the DePady block. I wonder if they'd be willing to rent parking spaces or something along those lines. I wonder.
And an underground tunnel.
And well, you can walk across the street, Morgan.
Okay.
Municipal lot is that far from?
It's not.
It's not that far. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like kind of to be continued, but there's a general consensus that focusing the realty discussion, kind of exploration around Enosburg makes sense. I mean, I certainly don't think we need to entirely close the conversation around the People's Plaza, but again, my general sense is Enosburg makes more sense, and it's a much less complicated lift to find something to rent in Enosburg as opposed to this kind of bond measure and purchase of the People's Plaza. And truthfully, for me, it doesn't feel really good to potentially displace lots of hardworking small business owners from the People's Plaza. I don't love the kind of, I don't love that idea. So we can continue to kind of keep it in the fold, but I think it seems like, Morgan, the pharmacy space could be a really potentially good fit for us. So it'll be interesting to kind of hear back from you at our next meeting, what more you've heard from the folks who might be purchasing it and going that kind of historic renovation arm, or would we potentially just rent it outright from the existing owner?
Yeah, sounds good. And I know that you all know this, but I'll put it out there on the off chance that someone is watching this meeting in the future on YouTube. You, as the SU board, only have the option of renting a place. You are not allowed to own a building. So when we're talking about this, the potential of the People's Plaza, it's not the 6 of you making the decision to buy that. It would be the Enosburg Richford board saying that they wanted to take that to their voters. So I just wanted to have that out there. I will continue to talk with the folks involved with the Pearly Block. And I would say that although it feels unlikely at this point, you don't need to cross the Armory off your list entirely. They may come to the point where they feel that it's important to have a tenant in there that's not under their town budget in order to help defray some of the costs. So that one could resurface at some point.
Great. So, and Morgan, maybe this seems like an appropriate time to maybe segue into the discussion that we punted earlier around the central office lease.
Yes, so I put this out, I believe, in your report. I had a conversation initially with Sherry Paquette, who is one of the 5 select board members in Richford, and she's the one who's in charge of their buildings, including the post office. And we went back and forth on negotiating another lease for this space, and our lease expires on June 30th, so coming up in about 5 months. Sherry had talked about the idea of whether it made sense from their perspective to go on to a 6-month lease initially to get them on a calendar year, which aligns better with their budget, or if they were looking for another 12-year lease. And I said that a 6-year lease would be great, and we would also consider month to month, given that it looks like at some point we'll be heading out.
Morgan, you mean 6-month and 12-month, not 6-year and 12-year.
Month, yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
6-month lease. They came back to me after your last board meeting and offered the 1-year lease option. And so I told them that I would want to bring that back to you as a board to decide if that was something that you're comfortable with, given the mix of these other potential properties. If you want to give us guidance that you will only take a lease of X number of months, I think we just want a little bit of a sense on where you'd like us to go. And Lynn, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think that in thinking about this, I think that the point of it is we want to make sure that we're doing what we need to do for the organization. So if there's a potential that 6 months, into that lease, you're going to have a space that might be ready for you, or might be getting close to ready for you. We don't really want to be in a situation where we're paying double or twice for 2 spaces. The other idea is, if this is really something that the community in Richford is really wanting to push, is that 1-year idea. I think that, Morgan and I have had some long conversations about this year and some of the lessons we've learned from this year. And I think that one of the things that we've identified is that we have the capacity to work pretty effectively remotely if we need to. So if we did get into a situation where, you know, they really were not wanting to bend on that and the board was not wanting to go with a full 1-year lease, we could explore some smaller spaces, like maybe one of the spaces in the tag block, or maybe approaching the Enosburg Richford board about the Monteith House and creating a home space for our business office and some shared workspaces for the education leadership team, so that we could have some working remotely and some working in person and kind of share those spaces. So I do think there are options. I don't want you to feel like you don't have an option in terms of duration of lease.
And it seems to me that all of these spaces are going to need, you're going to need some amount of a runway to get them really ready for you to move into. So, so one option was like every 6 months it would renew. Is that what you said, Morgan? Like that almost feels like too long, but I see where they might not be comfortable with month to month. Like, you know, do we go 6 months now and then move month to month or something like that? None of this is going to happen overnight. So
We might have a better sense, Jean Marie, if they would agree to the first 6 months as we start approaching that next lease period, whether or not we could commit to another full 6 months or whether or not we would want to push at that point for a month to month. We'd have a better sense of the circumstance.
Right. I think if you look at a 6 month as an example, that would be July to December. And if we are needing to negotiate with the town, say in October, to see whether we want to renew that for another 6 months, at that point, we should know whether we're going to be serious about shipping out in December, or if it's going to be, easy to say, well, at this point, it's really going to be April or May. So I'm certainly not feeling like 6 months is too long.
So Morgan, and you need direction from us, kind of a consensus around whether we want to kind of propose again that 6 months is really what makes the most sense for us, given the kind of exploration that we're kind of in the midst of. And then that would pull us through December. And then we would be able to potentially, if we aren't ready and haven't found something that really suits our needs, we would be able to then ask for another 6 months or month to month and see what they would say. But there is a possibility, I just want to be clear, there's a possibility that we could propose, say 6 months really is truly what makes the most sense for us right now. And they could say no, in which case we may find ourselves needing a temporary home. Correct?
Correct. So the way that I see this unfolding is that if you say, go ahead and do a year, we will probably have an agreement in place by the end of this week. If you tell us we're only good for 6 months, I will bring that to them tomorrow. They'll have to have a discussion. In my logical mind, I don't see why they wouldn't take that. But if they came back and said, no, we don't want that, it's only a year, they're going to have to wait until your next meeting, and we'll come back and say they won't do 6 months. Do you want us to just plan on going remote or going to Monteith or talking to somebody else in Shontag or another smaller space somewhere more central? I would hope it doesn't come to that, but that's how it could play out.
I say 6 months.
think
Although I
6 months-
really think
six
yeah.
months is good, I think.
Okay. Jean Marie, you comfortable with 6 months, Emily?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So it sounds like, Morgan, that right now the board would like to push for the 6 month. And then I'd see, and then given everything we're trying to kind of manage right now, I would suggest that we schedule a February meeting. I know we're not technically supposed to meet till April, but if we're going to need to hear back from, know what they said about that 6 month lease, and we will also hopefully have some updates on the pharmacy space, it might be helpful to have a February meeting.
So
Or
I
at
think
least
the
discuss
update,
that stuff.
I think the update on the pharmacy space would come towards the end of February. So we can maybe reach out as we get closer and try to schedule time at that point, if that works for Lynn as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds like a plan.
that works for me, Morgan. I think that we would keep that agenda pretty centered on this work. The other work, and it's on your board agenda tonight, Mary, is to talk about our book discussion.
Yes.
Book. I wonder if we want to just carve a little bit of time at that meeting to also initiate the start of the book discussion.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm definitely mindful of the late hour too right now, and I know we still need to do an executive session. Lynn, did you want to dive into the equity book kind of discussion now, or were you saying we would punt that?
So I had not planned on having the book discussion today. I thought we could
Okay.
talk about what are we going to commit to. So if we could carve out some time at the February meeting and say, okay,
Sure.
let's read to this number of chapters before your February meeting, and then let's read this number of chapters before your April meeting, and set aside a little bit of time to discuss what we've learned in the book. I think that
Perfect.
would be good. We didn't really set any expectations about what people should have read before tonight.
Okay, no, of course. Okay, that sounds good. So we are saying we're going to do a February meeting, and we'll kind of fine tune it. It'll be pretty tailored to the central office discussion and the equity book discussion. And we need to land tonight on kind of what feels like a manageable amount of reading for everyone to incorporate into their busy lives.
Yes.
What do folks have a thought about how many chapters we might like to try to tackle in the first discussion by February?
I will say it's a pretty easy read.
Yes.
It goes pretty quickly. The chapters are small. Yeah, big font.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually read the whole book already, so I'm good. Whatever.
Great.
Yeah,
ready.
same.
You're ready.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
Maybe the first 3 sections, Mary. What do you think about that? That's 107 pages.
Yeah, I think
and then
that
would leave us, 120-ish.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So seems like we could probably let our administrators go and Northwest Access go. And then we'll need a motion to enter executive session unless there's anything else for administrators.
I'll make the motion to go into executive.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. Really appreciate all the hard work. The motion is to enter executive session at 9 o'clock. Rick?
Aye.
Polly?
Aye.
Emily?
Aye.
Jean Marie?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. So we exited executive at 9:08 with no motions to be made. And if there's no further discussion or anything else, we've decided we'll do a February meeting. Anyone have anything they'd love to add before we sign off for the night? No? All right then, folks, meeting is adjourned.